Good morning, everyone. You're all very welcome today. My name is Irma. I'm the director of Performing Arts Forum, and it's really great to see so many of you here today. Before I introduce Katie Rains and Indigo, who've led this research, I just wanted to give a little bit of the context for this work. So, as you know, Performing Arts Forum does a lot of work in the audience development space, but we also do a lot of work in the green arts space. And since 2018, in collaboration with Katrina Fallon, we've been running the Green Arts Initiative in Ireland. So, this is a really nice Venn diagram moment for us. It's a chance for us to really look at some of the work you've all been doing in terms of your green arts work and marketing, etc., and also to get a sense of what audiences think of that and how we could maybe Venn diagram those two things together. So just to say as well, all the Green Arts Initiative resources in Ireland are on our website, and I'm going to post links to those now too. We've also got an event coming up on 6th of November that some of you might be interested in, and I'm posting that as well. And in terms of the presentation that Katie's going to make to you all now, the full version of this report is on our website already, and I will share that into the chat as well. But for now, I'm delighted to hand over to Katie.
Thanks, Emma, and hello everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. I realise you're all very pressed for time, so we'll try and make it a really valuable use of that time. I'm joined by my colleague Zoe from Indigo, who's done a lot of the data crunching on this. I'm going to do the CEO thing where I present somebody else's work, but there we are. That's how it is. So I'm really excited to be sharing this with you today because at Indigo we've been doing work in this space on Act Green for the last 4 years in the UK. And it very much came from the place where we realised that there was a lot being asked of arts organisations in terms of how to start tackling the climate emergency, and a lot of people were saying to us, we're not sure kind of what audiences think about this and whether they'll just be really anti what we're doing or whether they'll be worried that we're not doing enough. How do we manage that? And so back in 2022, we decided to do, or 2021 actually, we decided to do a piece of research to find out what audiences thought cultural organisations should be doing around the climate emergency, so that we had some data to kind of baseline that. So we did that, and we were really quite surprised with the results of that. So we've continued that in the UK. But it's fantastic to now be able to also do this in Ireland this year for the first time. So I'm going to show you the results of that today. Organisations that have taken part will be able to see and should be able to see their own results from their own audiences with the links that we've supplied them with. If any of you took part and you can't find that link, just let us know and we'll resend it to you. But what I'm going to show you now is the aggregated findings from all the responses that we received from all the organisations that sent it out. So I'm going to share my screen, if it will work. Great. Hopefully that's all fine. Cool. So what I'm going to run you through today is firstly, who responded to the survey, cultural audiences and what they think about the climate emergency, and that'll become clear why we're looking at that first. The role they think that you should play as cultural organisations, which of the initiatives that the Theatre Green Book tells you to do are most important to audiences, how they are willing to be involved to help you with your climate actions. And then I'm going to just reflect a little bit at the end about what we've learned around some of the challenges about communicating your sustainability efforts, because that's where the rubber really hits the road and where it can be quite hard. So firstly, in terms of who responded to the survey, so 28 organisations sent it out and received responses. So they're spread across the whole country, as you can see, with a bit of a concentration in Dublin and Munster. Art centres predominantly were the ones who sent it out, but we do have 2 museums and galleries, 3 festivals, 3 theatres as well. So there's a good spread. The age profile does skew older because this was sent to arts attenders, and as we know, they skew older. So unsurprisingly, this is an older sample than you would find if you talk to the general population. And they're quite a frequent, they're culturally engaged bunch. So 36% of them are attending something cultural at least once a month. So this is not a kind of representative sample of the population of Ireland. This is looking at arts, highly engaged cultural and arts attenders, which is who we wanted to talk to. So that's good. These were the organisations who sent it out and received responses. So thank you to all of you, because I know it's a big ask, but it's been so worth it. And so I'm going to show you the results. So we got over 3,000 completed results. We had over 5,000 responses, but when we took out those who hadn't finished the survey, we ended up with over 3,000, which is a really, really robust sample to be looking at. So first of all, the question here is, how concerned are cultural audiences about the climate emergency generally? So what we've done here is we've used exactly the same question as is used in Climate Change in the Irish Mind, which was a 2024 population-wide survey. And you can see that our Act Green respondents, so the cultural audiences, 92% of those say they're somewhat or very worried about climate change, which is significantly higher than the average in the Irish population at large. So probably doesn't surprise you, but given that this does skew older, it's really interesting finding, I think, that cultural organisations are even more worried, cultural audiences are even more worried than the general public about climate change. This is just one of the quotes from the survey that people put in. Okay, now interestingly, I had expected when we first started this work to see younger people much more concerned about this than older people, because that's what we hear in the media all the time, isn't it? But in terms of cultural audiences, there really isn't that much difference. So 94% in under 35s, 93% in 55 pluses. So that really isn't a significant difference at all. But those, the more engaged with culture you are, the more likely you are to say that you're worried or very worried about this. So you can see the people who come less frequently on the left, it's still 83%, but a big 10 percentage point difference between those and the people who are consuming culture very regularly. And interestingly, when you compare cultural audiences with the general public, those cultural audiences are much more likely to have actually acted on those values, actually done something. So the question here is, over the last 12 months, how many times, if ever, have you bought a good or a service from a company because they have taken action to reduce climate change? And that's 36% who've done that many or several times in cultural audiences, compared with only 17% in the general population. So the picture that is starting to emerge here is that if cultural organisations are not showing, demonstrating their credentials and their actions in regard to this, this is that their audiences may well punish them for that because they are choosing on their values. And interestingly, their spending choices reflect their principles, not their income. So even if we look at the above average versus the lower than average audiences, it's about the same in terms of the people who say that they will buy goods and services from companies because of their green credentials and values. Okay, so that's the general picture. So we've got people who are more concerned than the general public in terms of arts audiences. So if that's the case, what role do they think we as cultural organisations should be playing to tackle the climate crisis? So first of all, 81% of them agree with this quite bold statement. Cultural organisations have a responsibility to influence society to make radical change to address the climate emergency. That's a pretty strong statement, and 40% of people definitely agree with that, and a further 41% tend to agree with it. So 81% agreeing with that statement, I think, is pretty definitive. But only 19% of them think that cultural organisations place great importance on climate action. So we've got a gap between what they think we should be doing as a sector and actually what is happening or what they think is happening. And perhaps even worse than that, nearly a quarter of them don't actually know what you're doing. So, how much importance do you think the organisation who sent you this survey places on playing an active role in tackling climate change? Nearly a quarter said, I don't know, right? And these are culturally engaged people. These aren't people who aren't switched on to culture. And again, which supports what we saw in the first section, these people will reward companies and businesses and organisations where they see you making an active commitment. So, where you've seen an organisation showing that commitment, what have you done? So, a cultural organisation specifically. So, what we can see here is over a third of them say, I've attended more, I've made a donation, quarter of them have made a donation, and 17% of them have sent a message of support. So they are, again, it's consistent with what we saw earlier. They are acting on their values. But what happens if you choose not to show that commitment or they don't see that you're showing that commitment? Well, actually, a third of them say, I've stopped attending or I'm attending less, um, or I've stopped donating or I've made a complaint. Now, so basically, if we don't show more obviously than we are doing at the moment our commitment to this, this is going to damage our bottom line as well as our relationship with our audiences and our ethics and credentials to those people. Okay, so what specifically do they think you should be doing? What do they think what do they expect you to do? And what is important to them that they see you doing? Now, I'm aware that there'll be an awful lot of very unsexy stuff that is going on around sustainability that you really don't particularly want to talk about or isn't very interesting. So, and that it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be doing that. And I'm certainly not suggesting that you should only be doing things that audiences think are important. But what this does help us to see are the things that audiences place the greatest importance on and therefore might be warm to hearing about you talking about as some of the things that you're doing. So, what we've used as our frame of reference for this is the Theatre Green Book, which I know is also being used in Ireland. And this has three parts to it. As you probably know, there's a volume one, which is around sustainable productions. So, it's about how you manage your actual productions in a sustainable way. The second is to do with your managing your building or your site. And the third is the kind of how you do things in that space, so sustainable operations. So we took the things that Theatre Green Book is telling you to do, and we asked audiences which of those were most important to them, and also which would make them more likely to attend as a result of it. So if we start with the sustainable productions, the dark purple column is what they expect you to do, and the yellow column shows that it would encourage them to attend. So you can see that recycling materials that have been involved in an event or an exhibition, nearly 90% of them just expect you to do that. They expect you to do it. And it's the highest in terms of encouraging their attendance. So if they know that's what you're doing, two-thirds of them say it would encourage them to attend more. But obviously, all of these are very, they're expecting you to do quite a lot, actually. They're expecting you to use materials from recycled sources. They're expecting you to encourage artists and staff to choose sustainable travel, and over half of them minimising touring travel impacts. So they're the top four, but when you look at the report, you'll see there's more in there. Again, on sustainable productions, they expect you, 70% of them, nearly 70%, expect you to be engaging with them and facilitating conversations through events and workshops around the climate emergency. And 60% of them say that would encourage them to attend. So that seems like a really good one to lean into. Nearly two-thirds of them say they expect you, not would like you, they would expect you to tackle the subject of climate change through the artistic or curated programme. We'll come back to that a bit later because I think that's perhaps one of the more contentious ones and ones to talk about. But they also want to see you running specific content, exhibitions, festivals to explore the subject. So they're not just expecting you to have recyclable sets and non-plastic, single plastic use and all that kind of stuff. They're actually expecting to see this as a core part of your programming and your artistic output. So here's an example of one of the comments. Use exhibitions to make people think about our impact on the planet. And we know the power of culture and creativity to help change people's minds or make them think differently. That's what we all do, why we do what we do. So they're clearly recognizing that and they want to see us do that. So then if we look at the buildings, so again, their expectations are quite high here in terms of you avoiding harmful cleaning products. And this is consistent. The second one is consistent with what we've seen here in the UK, which is supporting biodiversity in any outside space. They expect you to do it, but they love to see it. So that's the one that would make them most likely to attend. And we'll come back to the other opportunities for that in a minute. There's loads of detail in here. I'm not going to go through every graph in lots of detail, but you get the idea. So the things that are at the top of this graph, and particularly the things with the star on them, are the things you should perhaps start talking about first because they're what audiences really want to see and will encourage them to attend. Interestingly, this second one on this graph, 75% of them expect you to inform them how they can help you to become more sustainable. So if you're not already speaking to your audiences about how they can help you in your sustainability journey, you need to be. And then this gets into the whole can of worms around public transport and travel, which we can talk about. But even things like just providing information about what's available, installing bike racks, or even just signposting people to where those things are. You know, if they are available, are there electric vehicle charging points anywhere near the venue? If so, where are they? Just even if you're not providing them, just telling people where the nearest one is. Arranging additional bus services for audiences travelling from areas underserved by public transport. Yeah, of course we can all do that, can't we? Of course we can't, but it's really important to them. And if this sort of research, I don't know, maybe helps us with lobbying or collective lobbying to transport providers or local authorities or whatever it happens to be, then it can help in that. I'm not suggesting this is something that any of you can do anything about overnight, but it's good data to have that that's so important to audiences. Okay, so picking up on that bit about how they expect you to inform them about how they can help you, how to what extent are they prepared to help you and get involved in your sustainability story? So first of all, we asked them how they travel to the venue. And obviously in Ireland, most people, well, a lot of people do travel by car. Under 35s were more likely to use public transport. I'm not sure whether that's the extent to which there's more of those people in Dublin and therefore there's more access to public transport. I don't know. You'll know better than I will. But and of course, a lot of those people won't have their driving licenses yet. So that's kind of what you would expect. But interestingly, as we know, convenience and timing shapes their choice. So if an event is going to end late and there is no public transport after the event, of course, they're not going to be able to travel by public transport. And so that kind of ties into the first one as well. So it isn't a lack of willingness to travel by public transport. It's actually the lack of available public transport options, either at all or after the show finishes. But half of them say they want to actively play a part in supporting the cultural organisations to become more sustainable, your efforts to become more sustainable. So this was a kind of sliding scale and they had to choose one. So half of them said, yeah, we want to help you and we don't need any incentive, we don't need any reward, we just want to help you. So just tell us how to do that. Another quarter said, Okay, yeah, I'll make some changes. I'll do that, but as long as it doesn't inconvenience me. So I think messaging how people can help you to deliver on your objectives in a way that makes it really easy for them to do so is quite important. And then a small proportion say that they would change their behaviour, but they'd be looking for some sort of incentive or reward from the organisation to do that. So I don't know, things like getting 50p off the coffee or 50 cents off the coffee if it's a reusable cup, something like that. Here's the things that they are most willing to do. So the ones with the big fat green bar are the ones they're most likely to say that they're going to do. So this is the low-hanging fruit. So they're really happy to reduce their use of disposable packaging and single-use plastic, but you need to make that choice available to them and easy for them to do. Um, 67% of them, over two-thirds, say that they would be willing to choose more sustainable food options whilst at the venue. So that could be locally sourced produce, it could be vegan food. The transport, they're willing to do it. It's just, I suspect, the lack of available transport as we've just seen. And this last one, I'm just going to pull out this last one because 29% of people say they would be quite or very likely to donate their time as a green volunteer. Now, I know it's come at the bottom of that graph, but nearly 30% of people saying, yeah, I'd be happy to volunteer to help you with your green efforts. And obviously, as you'd expect, the donors and supporters are more represented in that group. Um, I think that's really exciting. I mean, we didn't actually say what a green volunteer is. We just made up the term and stuck it in there. And we did the same in the UK survey. And a huge number of people said they'd be willing to do it. So, and the other thing that's significant here is that there's actually quite a high proportion of non-supporters and donors who are prepared to do this as well. So it could be a way of kind of getting a loyalty and a support from people who wouldn't necessarily support you financially, but might be able to support you in this. So it's just worth a thought. Oh, hang on. It's now decided to freeze on me. Don't do that. Okay. And then in terms of putting their hands in their pockets, what would they be willing to donate to? If you had fundraising campaigns around any of this stuff, what would they be most likely to donate to? And again, as we saw earlier, they really love biodiversity projects. So if you said, right, we're going to redevelop this bit of outside space um, into this, biodiversity garden or something, A, you might get some volunteers, but B, 67% say they would be willing to support that financially. Um, Things to help you generate your own energy, 60% of them would support that. Um, and things to improve the energy efficiency. So I think they might see that in a way of, okay, I'm making a one-off donation here, but it's going to help the organisation in the longer term, both to reduce costs and to be more sustainable. And they also back creative projects exploring climate issues. And I have to say, I was quite surprised to see this because we'll come on to it in a minute about some of the challenges of communicating all this stuff. But they're much more up for this than I expected them to be, which is fantastic. Artistic projects which explore the climate emergency as part of the autistic programme, over half of them saying they would be likely to support that financially. Okay, so finally, I'm just going to reflect on some of the challenges that we've seen organisations face in trying to communicate this. And what we've heard from organisations is we think audiences are either saying to us, stick to putting on shows, stop trying to be woke, it's PC gone mad, it's all of that voice going on there, versus the eco warriors going, oh, well, okay, so you've put a few recycling bins in. That's not enough. Why aren't you doing this? And why aren't you doing that? So you're kind of stuck in the middle that you're worried about, or you could be worried about not doing enough and not pleasing those people. But equally, other people going, well, you're an arts organisation. What are you doing this for? So you can be stuck in the middle, and that can lead to paralysis, which I think then potentially leads to not talking about it enough. And that's possibly why, over a quarter of people don't actually know what cultural organisations are doing. So this is something that the UK Chartered Institute of Marketing published an article on this in 2023 saying that many industries and organisations, it's not just ours, are opting not to talk about their environmental strategies, plans and actions for fear of being called out for greenwashing. So that's at one end of the spectrum. But I also see it as being called out for, not doing what you should be doing, as people think. So I just want to offer you this little model that we came up with, which is trying to think about how you might start to communicate all the things that you're doing around sustainability, because it's quite overwhelming. What do I do? What do I talk about first? Do I talk about the heat pump? Do I talk about the recycling bins? Do I talk about the bike racks? What? And there's just too much. And bombarding audiences with lots of information or sticking a massive blog on your website that they're probably not going to read isn't going to help. So we've tried to construct this to give a bit of an idea about how you might go about it. So at the bottom of the pyramid, the kind of fundamentals is you need to be able to show and tell audiences that you're doing what they expect you to do and provide the infrastructure to help them do that. Now, you're probably already doing lots and lots around this. So just sort of being aware of what that is and even making a list of what that is. So recycling bins, bike racks, anything that you're doing that is just what they expect you to do. And we've got some clues as to what that is from the survey. So tell people what you're already doing in a fairly matter-of-fact way. Provide visible infrastructure so that they can help you. Okay. Then the next layer up from that is kind of leading by example, where you're starting to highlight some of the ways in which you're trying to do something differently, either differently from what you've done before or differently from other organisations. So it could be like a biodiversity project or a new way to encourage people to travel to the venue if that's possible, but still probably around kind of operations, venue management, rather than creative output. And I think that audiences will be interested in your story about how you're trying, even if you don't ultimately succeed, or even if you haven't got everything sorted. I think they just want to hear about what you're doing. Okay, so then we start to get into the territory that I'm calling positively challenging. So it's clear that audiences want us to use our influence in society to help facilitate conversations and exploration around climate change. So this is where things like events and workshops might come in to sort of start that conversation. It could also be where we think about collective lobbying for better public transport in the evenings or things like that. But I think it's where we start to get into that sensitive territory around facilitating and not preaching. And certainly, the comments that do come through are that are more negative tend to be around that. Don't preach to me, just give me the information and I can make my own choices. And then at the top of the pyramid is kind of the purely creative bit, really, where our writers, artists, musicians can help us mere mortals to see what a different future might look like, and to start really helping use that creativity to help us imagine that positive new future that could be in reach. So I think we're in a unique position as cultural organisations to be able to have the privilege to do the top bit of the pyramid. But I think the difficulty is that if you suddenly go in and start doing all of that and you haven't shown that you're doing the other bits of the pyramid, or at least some of the other bits of the pyramid, I think you could be accused of either greenwashing or preaching to people. So it needs to feel authentic. And I would argue that it's going to feel authentic if they're also clear about what you're doing at all the other layers of the pyramid, or at least some of them. So, final thoughts from me before we go into questions. Obviously, the report you can access. I'll give you a QR code to access that in a minute. Do visit our communications pyramid. We've got that on our website. There's a blog you can read about how to use that. I think the most important thing is that you get your sustainability message front and centre. I don't know how many of you have anything about sustainability on your homepage of your website, but if not, you might want to think about that. And then the third thing is remember that you're not alone, and we're doing this together. Indigo Share is all about the collective approach to doing this. And if we can start to share some examples of things that we've each done, that will help all of us get there quicker. So that's the QR code if you want to download the report from us. It's also on the Performing Arts Forum website. And I will stop sharing my screen. Thank you very much.
Katie, that's so amazing. Thank you so much. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to pause the recording and then we can open to questions.